me my things. Hi guys, welcome back. It's me Yoksh, and day 14 of learning to code. Yeah, let's run code. And yeah, from today I'll be starting my streams with the coding streams, and then after doing a little bit of coding, when I get bored and when I feel that much is enough for today, after that after these streams, coding ones, will do my Anki streams. Nobody is here, but still I wanted to inform. Nobody cares. My io. I know nobody cares, but still for the memories. Okay, this time's project is going to be like it's a full stack project, so yeah, we'll be learning a lot. I will be learning a lot from this project though. I'll be, not you. Yeah, I'll be learning a lot. Project though. I'll be, not you. Yeah, I'll be learning. I guess I should turn on a little noise suppression, because as you know, it's not good. I guess it's fine now. It's not gonna make much difference, but yeah, I have some background noise. That's fine. Hi desu. Hi, hello. Local server. Bad code guy. Hello. Coffee. Konnichiwa. Sayonara. Konnichiwa. Yeah. If I have that. Of course. Yeah, what? Oh, okay. Okay, we're gonna remove all of that. All that we don't need. It's cold.ちょっと待って。Wait a sec. मेरी कंबल लाने दो मुझे. Yeah. Yeah. Even the seat is freezing. God dang it. こんにちは、さようなら。一番。えいよ。いやいやいやいや。うん、いいか。Hi, I need to do one thing. I need to do this thing first. Okay. Hi. Let's start.
Technical standpoint.
Today a new project. Coffee tracker.
Part of our Alright, it is now time we embark on the final part of our adventure together. I hope you're having an absolutely brilliant time. And this project that we're about to build is insanely cool. It's a coffee tracker, it's got database, authentication, everything you could possibly want. You could literally add monetization to this super easily, start charging a monthly subscription fee, and people are going to pay you. You'll make absolute bank. The world is the limit with what you're going to learn from this project. And it's literally the tech stack, well, pretty much, that I use to develop my own software, which people pay for and I make money. The backbone of this technology, Hire.sh, my resume builder software, is very equivalent to what we learn in this project. So you could take this, adapt it, and turn it into your own profitable SaaS platform. So it's super exciting, should be absolutely brilliant, and by the end of it, you should really be feeling comfortable in the driving seat of React.js. Now, as always, you can find a link to the GitHub code in the description down below, so if you get stuck at any point along the way, you can always compare your code to mine, and likewise, if you have any questions, leave them as issues on the code repo. Now, third time's the charm, it's time to initialize our final project, and I'm going to start off doing that from within an empty Visual Studio Code window. So this is a completely brand new window. Now I'm going to go ahead and click the open button right here, and I'm going to navigate to the folder where I have my React full course. Right here, let's look for React full course. And we're going to go ahead and open this folder. We're not going to select any of these subfolders. That's going to open up our project. Here we can see we've got our Pokédex app. We can also see we've got our to-do app. You know, these should be committed to your GitHub. And now we can open up a new terminal instance using the control VS and find that special command for initial. So from within the React, I thought where a fiend is someone who is an addict. I'm going to select the React.js framework. We're going to select JavaScript, and then we're going to follow the instructions printed out in our terminal by cding or changing a directory into caffeine, just like so. Hit enter on that. Then we're going to run npm I or npm install. That's going to install all of our node modules for our project. And for now, that should just about do it. We're not going to boot it up just yet. Now I'm also just going to close out of all of those tabs that we had open up there. And here we have our final project, Caffeine. Now that has all the same files as usual. Obviously the ones we ignore, node modules, any of these lint config files, the package.json, all of that stuff we're going to ignore. For the README, I would recommend having a what's the problem, how am I going to solve it, any issues I came up with, what is the final solution. And that's just great because if you're uploading these projects to GitHub, employees can read through them, gain some context as to what and why you are building stuff. So that's super cool. You don't have to do it just if you want to. And then for the main stuff, all the magic happens inside of the index.html, the public folder for all of our assets for our projects such as images, and the source directory with all of our React.js files. Now straight off the bat, we're going to delete the app.css, we'll keep the index.css, and inside of the app, we're going to clear out this React functional component and get rid of all of the JSX, keep these React fragments, which are the empty divs. We can get rid of the state until we are left with just a few lines of code that is a bare bones React.js functional component. Now this application, just like the rest of them, is pre-styled. So what I'm going to do is come into the index.css, delete all the code that is currently in there as part of the boilerplate React.js project. Yes. Delete all the code that is currently in there as part of the boilerplate React.js project. And the first thing I'm going to do is copy the code from the index.css sheet inside of the GitHub repo. It should be around 278 lines of code. We're going to go ahead and save that. And then
what's that? Red color. Oh, we don't need that. Oh, kind of a history thing, huh?
Also going to 78 lines of code. We're going to go ahead and save that. And then we're also going to copy across the fanta.css sheet, and that obviously has all of the styles for the elements and all that good stuff. So now that we have completely styled our application, we're the world's fastest React.js stylers, which is a pretty cool title to have. The last thing we're going to do to finish our configuration is come into the main.jsx, which takes our app and injects it into that div with the ID of root. Now in here at the top, we're just going to import that fanta.css sheet, and that's all of our styling done for this entire project. Now also pretty typical when we're just starting a new React.js project, I like to set up my folder. Now in here at the top, we're just going to import that fanta.css sheet, and that's all of our styling done for this entire project. Now also pretty typical when we're just starting a new React.js project, I like to set up my folder directory, and the only thing I really need to do in this case is to create two folders. The first one is components from within the source directory. The second one that we're also going to make is a secondary folder, and that second folder is just going to be called utils, and it's got all of our utility functions for this project. Now as for the components that we're going to have, if we just go ahead and make some JSX files, the first one on our list is going to be a layout.jsx. Now this is a new file. It's pretty cool. We'll see how it works shortly. We're just going to create it for the second. After that, we've got a secondary one. This one is going to be called authentication.jsx. Now this is obviously the first time we're dealing with authentication inside of a React.js project, and this project is actually a full stack project, as we'll be using Firebase for all of the backend database and authentication functionality. So that is super cool. We'll learn how to set all of that up. After the authentication.jsx, we have another one. This is going to be called coffee form. The form is capitalized.jsx. That's going to have a form that allows us to take in all of the data about a user's coffee habits. After that, we've got a stats.jsx. This component just breaks down all of the statistics about the user's coffee habits. After that, we have a history.jsx. Let's hit enter on that. And then pretty close to the end, we have a modal.jsx. That's very equivalent to the modal that we used to display the Pokemon move information in the previous project. And is that all of them? We have one more, and it's called the hero.jsx, where the hero section or the hero component is for basically the converting of a site visitor into an official user. For example, if we come back over to my site, this section right here is the hero section. It takes a person from visiting the website to deciding that they want to commit to it. So that's pretty cool. In this project, we're actually going to learn how we can speak to a user and try to really get them to convert to our site and become someone who habitually visits the website. So that's going to be pretty cool as well. Now, I always love creating components at the start because it really helps me just compartmentalize in my head what's actually going to go on in this project. Obviously, I'm going to have the hero section, then I'm going to have the coffee form, then underneath that I'm going to have all the stats and the history of people's coffee addiction so they can see just how appalling it is and how much bank they are. Obviously, I'm going to have the hero section, then I'm going to have the coffee form, then underneath that I'm going to have all the stats and the history of people's coffee addiction so they can see just how appalling it is and how much bank they are unleashing on the coffee industry. And obviously we also have the authentication system, which is going to allow a user to create an account, sign up. This is going to be displayed from within a modal, and then they can log out and obviously reload the page, load the website on their phone, and get all the same information. It's persisted everywhere. Now the other thing I've done for this project, and this is specific to when I'm building full stack projects that manage a lot of data, is I like to have fake data. And this is good because it helps me display everything and just mentally imagine what everything is going to look like without needing to actually do it 100 times before I actually have data that I can display. Data. And this is good because it helps me display everything and just mentally imagine what everything is going to look like without needing to actually do it 100 times before I actually have data that I can display on a screen. So for all of this data that I prepared, we're going to create a file inside of the utils folder called index.javascript. And what you'll want to do is once again head over to the GitHub, and if you're there, if you could start the repo, love that support, go to the index.javascript file inside of the utils directory and just copy all of that code across. Once again, it should be about 200 lines of code. And the first thing we're going to do is understand exactly what is going on inside of this file. Now this is a pretty important file for our project for a few reasons. First up, it has information about coffee levels. For example, we have a low caffeine blood level. If you're not familiar, a coffee might have 160 milligrams of caffeine. And there's also a concept known as a half-life, where the half-life of something like caffeine is the time taken for 50% of the caffeine in your bloodstream to be For example, we have a low caffeine blood level. If you're not familiar, a coffee might have 160 milligrams, known as a half-life, where the half-life of something like caffeine is the time taken for 50% of the caffeine in your bloodstream to be metabolized, which means that it's basically digested and no longer in your bloodstream. So that information is important because we're going to track how much caffeine is currently in the user's bloodstream. Let's say they had a coffee in the morning and a coffee now. Where are they at? What's the warning level? And what is the implication of that current caffeine level? Are they feeling high, where elevated caffeine levels can cause jitteriness, rapid heartbeat, trouble concentrating, signaling, which collectively signals an excessive intake? So we just have some status levels which tell us a bit more about what your caffeine level looks like. After that, we have all of the coffee consumption history. Now, once again, this is just fake data where the key is a UTC, which is a time zone, a millisecond amount for a time zone. So essentially, what we're going to do, the way we're going to track the data, is whenever a user adds a new entry, we're going to get the current UTC time, which is like the number of milliseconds that's passed since January 1st, 1970 or something like that. So it makes it a really good global time zone. And then we have a record of what they consumed and how much it costed. So at this particular time increment, a person got an Irish coffee and that cost $4.88. So that way we can tally up a bill, tell them how much they're spending. And if we scroll down, we can actually look up exactly how much that coffee option has. So I can't remember what we were just looking at. What is it? An Irish coffee. Here, if we look for Irish coffee, we can see that it has 160 milligrams of caffeine, which is not insignificant, where 1 cup of instant coffee might only have 30 milligrams. So this is just good information to have. We're going to need it for our project. We've got a whole lot of different coffee options that people can select from when they're inputting that information. After that, we have a variable that's used in some of the calculations beneath. This is the half-life. This is the hour amount. In this case, it's 5 hours. From a technical standpoint, the half-life can vary dependent on how much food you've eaten, what your food eating habits are like, what your body weight is, what your fat composition is, all that kind of stuff. But on average, it's probably around 5 to 6 hours, so this should be fairly accurate. And then beneath that, we have some general utility functions. Now, these are just not really specific to React, so I wrote them out in advance. The calculate current caffeine level function, all it does is it takes the history object, which we have up here, and it calculates from all of those. And then beneath that, we have some general utility functions. Now, these are just not really specific to React, so I wrote them out in advance. The calculate current caffeine level function, all it does is it takes the history object, which we have up here, and it calculates from all of those entries what your current caffeine level is, considering the half. half-life, which is from all it does is it takes the history object, which we have up here, and it calculates from all of those entries what your current caffeine level is, considering the half-life, which is the rate at which caffeine is metabolized or digested by your body. So it's not really that complicated. All it does is it basically takes all of the individual entries, adds them together as appropriate, and returns the final amount, the milligram amount. So that's pretty cool. After that, we have a helper function that just sorts through all the coffee options to find the caffeine amount associated with a particular coffee name. That's important because in our history, we only track the cost and the name. We don't actually track the caffeine amount because we have that information available in a different location. And this function just lets us go and look it up. After that, we have another function. This is called get the top 3 coffees. This just goes through our entire history and creates a tally of how many times we've had each type of coffee and returns the top 3. So that's an important statistic that a user can see. My 3 top coffees are a latte, an almond milk iced latte, and an oat milk iced latte. So that's a little bit of fun. After that, we have another function. This one's called time since consumption. And all it does is it takes the millisecond amount and converts it to a string that basically says 6 days, 4 hours, 2 minutes, and 37 seconds. So you can see that none of these are really React. They're just some utility that I thought could be done in advance and wouldn't really diminish on the amount of React.js covered in this course. It's kind of just some quality of life improvements. So that is the index that is copied across from the GitHub, and I just thought it was important to understand what's actually going on in the background of these functions. So now it is time to start coding. And where do we begin? Well, I think an appropriate place to start our project is inside of our now empty app.js. And the first thing I'm going to do, that I always do when I'm building an application with an authentication state, is I basically create a fake one to start off with. And this is a really good practice because it helps you develop your whole application as if a user was logged in, but you don't have the uptime of configuring all the authentication stuff until you actually need it. So currently, the way that I like to do that is with a variable defined inside of the app component that's just called isAuthenticated. And that's going to be set equal to false for the minute. And this is where we're going to manage our authentication state until we've configured our actual authentication. To do that is with a variable defined inside of the app side of our now empty app.js. And the first thing I'm going to do, that I always do when I'm building an application with an authentication state, is I basically create a fake one to start off with. And this is a really good practice because it helps you develop your whole application as if a user was logged in, but you don't have the uptime of configuring all the authentication stuff until you actually need it. So currently, the way that I like to do that is with a variable defined inside of the app component that's just called isAuthenticated, and that's going to be set equal to false for the minute. And this is where we're going to manage our authentication state until we've configured our actual authentication. And this is basically just in conjunction to having the fake data that allows us to build everything and then use real data, swap out the fake stuff, add in the real stuff at the very end. Now, if we come down, this is where we're going to manage our authentication state until we've configured our actual authentication. And this is basically just in conjunction to having the fake data that allows us to build everything and then use real data, swap out the fake stuff, add in the real stuff at the very end. Now, if we come down to the JSX right here, that is returned from the app component, the first thing I'm going to do is actually remove the React fragments in this case, and instead start off by adding the layout opening and closing tags. Now the layout component, which we're defined up here, if we save that, is going to be a React functional component where we export a default function called layout. Now the layout component, which we're defined up here, if we save that, is going to be a React functional component where we export a default function called layout. Now this layout React functional component returns the React fragments, which is pretty straightforward. And essentially how it works is we come in here and this component receives props, where the props it receives are not the attribute style, but instead it receives children content. So we can destructure that out from the props. And this works very equivalently to how the modal worked in the previous tutorial, where the children contents is just whatever is contained within the opening and closing tags, where we actually go and render out the component. Now we obviously need to import that from the layout.jsx file. And in a bigger project, I almost always have this layout file specifically for when we have different states, for example, an authenticated this layout. Import that from the layout.jsx file. And in a bigger project, I almost always have this layout file specifically for when we have different states, for example, an authenticated state, and perhaps they're even on different pages. And what that means is that I can reuse this layout, which often contains the header and the footer components. I can reuse this layout across multiple different pages, and that keeps my pages looking very consistent, and I don't have to rewrite any code. Now, as for what the layout component actually renders, rewrite any code. Now, as for what the layout component actually renders, bang smack in the middle, we're going to have the children content. So that's pretty straightforward, and we render those from within the curly braces, as that's what we throw JavaScript inside of to have it rendered within the JSX. And just above the JSX, underneath where we destructure the props, I'm going to define a variable called header, and this is going to contain the header opening and closing tag, and I'm going to define another variable called footer, and that is going to contain the footer opening and closing tag. And so now what I can do is from within the JSX, I can render out the header just as I did the children contents, and I can also render out the footer down the bottom. And just for correct HTML semantics, I'm going to throw the children contents within the main opening and closing tags. And so essentially what that means is that we just have our header opening and closing tags, then we have the main content of the document, and at the bottom we have the footer of the page. And so now this is a very reusable component where if we had lots of different pages, we could just throw in the layout as we have just in here, and whatever content we have on that page would be wrapped within the main section and consequently a repeated or reusable header and footer section. So that's just super convenient, and it's going to save us writing these out numerous times. So that is the layout done. What do we do next? Well, let's render out some contents within the layout tags. So if we think about how a page is going to flow, when a user comes to the page, the first thing they're going to meet is the hero section. That's the part that tells them these out numerous times. The content we have on that page would be wrapped within the main section and consequently a repeated or reusable header and footer section. So that's just super convenient, and it's going to save us writing these out numerous times. So that is the layout done. What do we do next? Well, let's render out some contents within the layout tags. So if we think about how a page is going to flow, when a user comes to the page, the first thing they're going to meet is the hero section. That's the part that tells them why they should convert into a user. So this is a self-closing component. We're going to render it out, and we're going to export a default function called hero, and that's going to return a div. Pretty straightforward, and that is our hero component complete. And I actually think I'm going to change those to React fragments and make that the general practice for this tutorial. And obviously when I say complete, it's obviously just complete for now, not eternally. While we're here, what I might do is copy this template and just paste it into all of these components quickly so that we don't have to come through and finish them all out independently. And then what I'm going to do is just update the name of each of these functions so that it matches the file name. So in the modal, that's going to have a function modal. In the history, that's going to have a function called history. In the authentication, that's going to have a function called authentication. In the coffee form, that's going to have a function called coffee form. And then in the hero section, that one's done, history is done. And now all of our components are blank React functional components, which means that the auto input will now
function.
I'll work blank React. The hero section, that section tells as well in that. that is a self-closing component. Will now work. We can import the hero section, and after the hero section, we're now going to have the coffee form, making sure that we import that component.
Maşallah champion. What the heck is that? Okay. Okay, I will just do it like that.
component as well, and that is a self-closing component. Components are blank React functional components, which means that the auto import will now work. We can import the hero section, and after the hero section, we're now going to have the coffee form, making sure that we import that component as well, and that is a self-closing component. So if we think about it, our page, the hero section, tells the person what the page is all about, and then the way that we're going to convert them in this application, there's a number of different ways, is by actually giving them the opportunity to see what the page would literally look like. They can start inputting all the information, and then when they go to add it, so that we hero section, and after the hero section, we're now going to have the coffee form, making sure that we import that component as well, and that is a self-closing component. So if we think about it, our page, the hero section, tells the person what the page is all about, and then the way that we're going to convert them in this application, there's a number of different ways, is by actually giving them the opportunity to see what the page would literally look like. They can start inputting all the information, and then when they go to add it, if they're not authenticated, we'll pop up the modal, we'll get them to sign up, save the information, and congratulations, we have converted a user. So that's how the coffee form is going to work. Now, underneath the coffee form, we have some information that is specific to users that have actually signed up to our page and are logged in. And for that, what we're going to do is create a variable that's called authenticated content. And that's going to be equal to some information that is specific to users that have actually signed up to our page and are logged in. And for that, what we're going to do is create a variable that's called authenticated content. And that's going to be equal to some React fragments that are inside the circular parentheses. And in here, I'm going to render out the stats component, and beneath that, I'm going to render out the history component, making sure once again to import both of them. And then what we can do, now that we have the authenticated content, what's returned from the page, we can conditionally render it. Now, if you recall, conditional rendering is technically JavaScript, so we use the curly braces. And inside here, we need to define the condition for which the content is rendered. And in this case, it's only when is authenticated is true. And so I think it's the and short circuit is what this syntax is called. We say is authenticated true, and only then can you actually render out authenticated content. And so this logic right here, while very simple, just says if authenticated is false, do not show the authenticated content. If it's true, then render out the authenticated content, which is the stats and history components as well. And so now that we have all of that done, we can start building out these components, and we actually have a lot of the foundational logic complete for developing this full stack application. So it is now time to boot up our project. We're going to
I think showing that. Yeah. God dang it. Same thing. Stupid.
Come down to the terminal and type in npm run dev, hit enter on that, and that is going to open up our project on localhost 517. And 3. We can paste that in, click enter, and we obviously get a completely blank application. Now, at this point, and I should have pointed this out earlier, all of the applications that we're developing are also themed for light mode as well. Well, it's dependent on what the user's default preference is. If you want to see what the light mode for any of these projects looks like, what you do is you open up the Chrome Developer Tools, and you click this little paintbrush right here, and you just select Prefers Color Scheme Light, and that will show you the light mode equivalent of the project. So maybe for a little while we'll keep it that way and see what it looks like. Now, the first component we're going to start off styling is actually the easiest, and it's the hero section, because it doesn't have a crazy amount of logic and is pretty much just some static content. So inside these empty React divs, we're going to start off at the top of our page with an h1 tag, and that's going to say coffee tracking for coffee, and then we're going to have the abbreviation tag, and that's going to say fiends, and then at the end we'll have an exclamation after the closing abbreviation tag. Now, if you're not familiar with the abbreviation tag, that is specifically used when you're going to add the title attribute, and because a fiend is a word that not will have an exclamation, the abbreviation tag, and that's going to say fiends, and then at the end we'll have an exclamation after the closing abbreviation tag. Now, if you're not familiar with the abbreviation tag, that is specifically used when you're going to add the title attribute, and because a fiend is a word that not a lot of people are familiar with, we're going to define it inside of the title attribute, which is added to the opening tag, and that says an enthusiast or devotee, and that's what the people using this application will be. So if we save that, we can see that comes up on our page right there. That's looking pretty hunky-dory, not too bad. Underneath that, we're going to have a div, and this is going to have a class name, where we use class name as the attribute instead of class inside of React, because class is a reserved keyword. Underneath that, we're going to have a div, and this is going to have a class name, where we use class name as the attribute instead of class inside of React, because class is a reserved keyword. And this is going to have a class of benefits list, and within it, we're going to list out some of the benefits that users will get from using this application. Inside here, we're going to have an h3 tag that just says try, and then we're going to have a span tag, which is a sub tag within this typography h3. And it's going to say caffeine, just like that. That's the name of the app. And the reason we're using a span is because we're going to give the span a class of text gradient, which is going to make it look all pretty. And the h3 itself also has a class of font-bolder. And then after the span, it's going to say, so it says try caffeine and start triple dot, just like that. And then we can save that, and beneath it, we can have a paragraph. And that's going to have the tick, if I can get it to show up. Come on, little tick. The tick emoji right here. If you don't have easy access to a tick emoji, you can obviously copy it from the GitHub repo. And then we can say tracking every coffee. So we're just finishing the sentence. Then I'm going to select that line, copy it, and paste another version beneath, and one more, because we're going to have 3 benefits, or 3 things that they're going to do. The second thing is measuring your blood caffeine levels. And then finally, it's going to be costing and quantifying your addiction, because that's what it is. Caffeine is a drug, and most people, well, at least I'll get a headache if I go too long without it. If it's 11 or 12 o'clock in the morning and I haven't had my coffee, I'll have a headache, which isn't good. I should really go to Caffeine Anonymous, I guess. Underneath that, above the closing fragment, we're going to have a secondary div, and this is going to have a class of card. So let's add a class name of card and a secondary class. So we're going to space separate them of info-card. And this is going to contain some information about caffeine that people might not know. So in here, we're going to have a div, and this is going to have an icon. We're going to set the icons up in just a second, but it's going to have an H3 that says, did you know, triple dot. Icons, once again, we're coming over to the Font Awesome CDN linked in the description down below. We're going to copy this top link tag, and we're going to paste it into the index.html of our document inside the opening and closing head tags beneath the title. So if we paste that in there, that's going to enable us to use Font Awesome icons. And while we're here, we're just going to update the title of our document to be caffeine. And then we're going to have a little bar symbol, poll symbol, I don't know what it's called. And it's going to say track your coffee, because that's what it's going to do. So now that we've imported that Font Awesome CDN package, we can now come into fontawesomeicons.com. We can select the icons, and we can search up the info icon. So we want to sort by the free ones, and right here we're going for this info circle. We're going to copy it and paste it just above this did you know, ensuring that we replace the class attribute with class name. And then beneath that, for this info circle, we're going to copy it and paste it just above this did you know, ensuring that we replace the class attribute with class name. And then beneath that, we're going to have an H5 tag, and this is going to say that caffeine. And now, if you tried to add an apostrophe, React would be unhappy, so you have to use the HTML code for an apostrophe, which is an ampersand, and then apos, and then a semicolon. So you just need these characters to have an HTML recognized apostrophe. Caffeine's half-life is about 5 hours, question mark. And then underneath that, we'll have a paragraph. Let's see who can type faster. This means that after 5 hours, comma, half the and obviously you can copy this from the GitHub if you want, caffeine you consumed is still in your system, keeping you alert longer, exclamation. So if you drink a cup of coffee with 200 milligrams ampersand a still your half-life of caffeine works. And now if we come back to the application, which we just haven't been looking at because we've been so intensely focused on the code, we now have a nice little hero section where people know, they learn about the application, what it's for. It's for tracking every, let's make sure we spell that correctly, every coffee, save that, measuring your blood caffeine levels, costing and quantifying your addiction, and we have this nice little information card that tells them a bit about it. And once again, we could come back to the dark color scheme, and that's what we're looking at. So that's pretty neat. That is the hero section done, and that is actually our first component complete because it doesn't have any JavaScript. It's just some information about the application. Now, the other one I want to focus on is inside of the layout. I also want to quickly develop or
Why? Hey.
Now, our first nice little information.
Circle something.